Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
About 15 years ago, I was fresh out of college. The housing market had just crashed, and while everyone else was panicking, I saw an opportunity. I had saved up some money from my part-time jobs during school, and with the help of a small inheritance from my grandmother, I managed to buy a modest starter home. It wasn't much, but it was mine. For years, I lived in that little house, slowly fixing it up and making it a home. I worked hard, climbing the corporate ladder and saving every penny I could. Then, about 5 years ago, I met my now husband. We hit it off immediately, and before long, we were talking about our future together. We both wanted a bigger place, somewhere we could start a family. That's when my parents started dropping hints. They were getting older, and the big house they'd lived in for years was becoming too much for them to handle. They had their eyes on my starter home. My mother would often comment on how perfect it would be for them, describing it as small and easy to maintain. She made it clear they could really see themselves living there. At first, I was hesitant. My parents had a history of financial troubles. They'd even faced foreclosure in the past. But they were my parents, and I wanted to help if I could. One day, my mom called me with exciting news. She informed me that my uncle had left them a huge inheritance, over 6 figures. I expressed my happiness for them. Then my mother suggested using some of the inheritance to buy my old house from me. I paused, considering the idea. It could work, but I knew better than to sell them the house outright. Their financial history was too risky. I proposed an alternative plan where they could use part of the inheritance to pay off the remaining mortgage and then rent from me. I explained it would be like a long-term lease. My parents loved the idea. We drew up a lease agreement, had it notarized, and everything seemed perfect. They would pay off the remaining $50,000 on the mortgage, and then their monthly rent would just cover the taxes and insurance, about $350 a month. It was a steal considering the location. For a while, everything was great. My parents were happy in their new home. I had peace of mind knowing they were taken care of, and my husband and I were settling into our new place. But then, last week, it all went to hell. I called my mom to let her know about a small increase in the insurance. When I informed her about the slight increase in rent, she asked how much it would be. I explained it was just $3 due to an increase in insurance. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, my mom exploded. She accused me of being money hungry and ungrateful, despite everything they had done for me. She claimed the house was now theirs since they had paid for it. She threatened that I couldn't evict them and that she would rip out everything she had added to the place if I tried. I attempted to calm her down, reminding her it was just $3 and referring to the lease agreement. But she dismissed the lease, accused me of lying about the insurance increase, and threatened to take the matter to court, claiming they would give her the house. I tried to reason with her, but it was futile. Eventually, I gave up and ended the call. A few days later, my dad called, demanding to see the bills. I sent them copies of the taxes and insurance documents, even showing them that I was charging them the discounted rate for early payment. I pleaded with my father to do the math, assuring him I wasn't cheating them. My father then revealed that my mother was furious and threatening divorce because he agreed with me. I suggested they consult a lawyer for clarity, but it was too late. The next day, my father called to inform me that my mother had filed for divorce. I was at my wit's end. Here I was, trying to help my parents, charging them a fraction of what I could get for the house on the open market. And this was the thanks I got. I compared their rent to market rates, noting that a studio apartment in our area goes for $1,500 a month, while they were paying $350 for a whole house with a yard. I decided enough was enough. I called my lawyer and started the eviction process. It broke my heart, but I couldn't let them take advantage of me anymore. 2 weeks later, I got a call from my dad. He informed me that my mother had consulted a lawyer who had explained she had no legal standing. He said she had calmed down and wanted to apologize. I expressed appreciation for the gesture, but informed him it might be too late as I had already started the eviction process. My father pleaded with me to reconsider, offering to pay the $3 and even double the rent if I would let them stay. I contemplated the offer for a long moment. Part of me wanted to stand firm, but they were still my parents. I proposed a new deal. They could stay, but the rent would increase to $700 a month, still well below market rate, but enough to cover future issues. I also required my mother to apologize in person and promised this would never happen again. My father agreed to the terms, thanking me and apologizing for not standing up to my mother sooner. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was something I could live with. And hopefully this whole ordeal taught my parents a lesson about looking a gift horse in the mouth. I've always been a bit of a prepper. So when I bought my house in this one neighborhood 5 years ago, one of the first things I did was build a reinforced bunker in my backyard. I stocked it with enough supplies to last me and my family for months. Canned food, water, medical supplies, you name it. My neighbors thought I was crazy. They'd make jokes about my doomsday prepping whenever they saw me carrying supplies to my bunker. The homeowners association even tried to fine me for building an unauthorized structure on my property. But I fought them on it and won. It was my land after all. Fast forward to last week. A massive tornado tore through our town, leaving a path of destruction in its wake. Houses were flattened, power lines were down, and the roads were blocked with debris. It was chaos. My family and I were safe in our bunker, but we could hear the wind howling outside. When it finally died down, we emerged to find our house damaged, but still standing. Many of our neighbors weren't so lucky. That's when things started to get ugly. People were desperate for food and supplies. The stores were either destroyed or picked clean. And that's when the homeowners association board members decided to take matters into their own hands. I was in my yard assessing the damage to my property when I saw them coming down the street. There were 5 of them, led by a woman I recognized as the HOA president. Let's call her Karen. They were armed with baseball bats, golf clubs, and what looked like a shotgun. Karen, the HOA president, called out to me, demanding that I open up my bunker because they knew I had supplies inside. I responded by reminding her that this was my private property and she had no right to be there. Karen dismissed my objections, stating that we were in a state of emergency and I needed to share what I had. I expressed my willingness to help my neighbors, but objected to them barging in and demanding my supplies. Karen then ordered her companions to force open the bunker. These people who had always looked down on me for my paranoid preparations were now trying to steal from me. I backed away towards my house. I warned them to stay back, but they didn't listen. They started advancing on my property, swinging their makeshift weapons. That's when I heard the first shot. One of my neighbors shouted at Karen and her group to drop their weapons and get on the ground. Suddenly, armed figures emerged from behind trees, fences, and bushes all around my property. It was my neighbors, the ones who had quietly prepared alongside me over the years. We had formed a sort of informal mutual aid group, agreeing to watch each other's backs if things ever went south. Another neighbor repeated the command for them to get on the ground. Karen and her goons were caught completely off guard. They spun around trying to figure out where the voices were coming from. Another warning shot rang out, and they finally dropped their weapons. Karen protested loudly, insisting that they were the homeowners association and that we couldn't do this to them. I retorted that they were trespassing and attempting armed robbery, implying that we indeed could take action against them. Just then, we heard sirens in the distance. Somehow, in all the chaos, the police had managed to clear the roads and were responding to calls. As they pulled up, I explained the situation to the officers. The officer announced that they would need statements from everyone and that Karen and her group would be taken into custody. As Karen and her cronies were being handcuffed and led away, she continued shouting that this wasn't over and that they had rights. I responded by asserting that I also had rights, including the right to defend my property from entitled thieves like her. In the days that followed, our little community came together. Those of us who had prepared shared our supplies with our neighbors in need. We organized cleanup efforts and helped each other rebuild. Karen and the other HOA board members are facing serious charges. Turns out when you try to raid someone's property with weapons during a disaster, the law doesn't look too kindly on that. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go restock my bunker. You never know when the next disaster might strike or when the next entitled HOA board might try to stage a coup. Fresh out of college with a degree in computer science, I was thrilled to land my first job at a mid-sized tech company. The excitement quickly faded when I realized my starting salary was significantly lower than industry standards. But beggars can't be choosers, right? I had student loans to pay off and bills piling up, so I took what I could get. My new team seemed friendly enough. They had this tradition of going out for lunch every Friday, and they invited me to join. At first, I was excited. It seemed like a great way to bond with my colleagues. Little did I know it would turn into a weekly exercise in frustration. You see, I'm a vegetarian. Not for any fancy reason, it's just how I was raised. The rest of my team, they were all enthusiastic meat eaters. Now, that wouldn't have been a problem if it weren't for their insistence on splitting the bill equally every time. The first Friday, I ordered a small salad and a veggie burger. Total cost? About $15. Everyone else? They went all out. Appetizers, steaks, fancy cocktails, the works. When the bill came, they casually announced we'd split it evenly. My share? $25. I was shocked but didn't want to make waves as the new guy. To make matters worse, they'd help themselves to my food just to taste. By the end of most meals, I'd barely eaten half of what I ordered and still left hungry. This went on for weeks. Each time I'd watch my meager paycheck dwindle faster than it should, all while subsidizing my co-workers' lavish lunches. I tried to bring it up once, subtly suggesting separate bills. I nervously suggested to my co-workers that we could do separate checks next time, or at least let me pay for just what I ordered. Karen rolled her eyes and dismissed my idea, saying it was ridiculous and that splitting the bill was easier and better for team bonding. Another co-worker chimed in, telling me not to be a party pooper and claiming it would all even out in the end. But it didn't even out. Not for me. So I decided to play their game. The next Friday, I ordered 2 appetizers instead of 1. The Friday after that, I doubled my main course order too. By the 3rd week, I was ordering dessert and asking for to-go boxes right at the table. Karen noticed my to-go boxes and commented on my apparently big appetite. I simply shrugged and explained that I was making sure I got my money's worth. I could see them starting to squirm as their bills crept up week after week. But on the 4th Friday, as we sat down, I made a show of studying the menu intently. One of my co-workers nervously suggested that we should do separate bills for vegetarian and non-vegetarian food that day. I pretended to be surprised and reminded them that they had said splitting was easier for team bonding. Karen, looking flustered, tried to argue that separate bills seemed fair. I smiled and ordered my usual 2 appetizers and main course, but this time I made a point of offering everyone tastes. From that week on, the equal split was history. Everyone started paying for their own meals, only sharing the cost of actual shared appetizers. Surprise, surprise! Everyone's individual bills went down. Turns out, they'd all been over-ordering, assuming the split bill meant they were getting a deal. I finally got to enjoy my Friday lunches, eating what I wanted without breaking the bank. It wasn't just about the money. It was about respect and fairness. Sometimes you have to serve up a little taste of their own medicine for people to get the point. I've always been close to my grandfather. He was like a second father to me, especially after my own dad passed away when I was young. Grandpa taught me everything, from fixing cars to managing finances. He was the rock of our family, always there with wisdom and a warm smile. Last year when he died, it hit me hard. I was only 23, still figuring out life, and suddenly my mentor was gone. But Grandpa, being the thoughtful man he was, left me his entire estate, including the house. It was a shock, to be honest. I never expected it. You see, my grandma had divorced him years ago. It was messy, from what I understood. She'd left him for another man, my uncle's father. Yeah, my uncle isn't even biologically related to Grandpa. Anyway, before Grandpa passed, Grandma had asked him to let her son rent the house. Grandpa, being the kind soul he was, agreed. They set up a 3-year contract for $1,800 a month, with an option to buy at the end for $377,000. So there I was, a 23-year-old guy, suddenly responsible for this whole estate. The probate process was a nightmare, but finally the house was officially in my name. That's when things started to get interesting. My uncle approached me one day, all smiles and friendly. He asked if I had a minute to talk. When I agreed, he brought up the fact that the contract was ending soon. He expressed his hope to extend it, citing high interest rates as the reason. I didn't really want to. I had plans, you know. I wanted to buy my own place soon. But then Grandma got involved. She insisted that I had to help out family. Reluctantly, I agreed to extend it for another 3 years. Big mistake. While I was waiting for the new contract to be drafted, my uncle came to me again. He asked if he could start some construction on the house. I told him I'd rather he didn't and suggested waiting until the new contract was sorted out. He seemed to agree without any issue. But guess what? A friend of mine who does construction work called me up a few days later. He informed me that my uncle had already started major work on the house. I drove over to check it out, and sure enough, walls were torn down, floors ripped up, all without permits. I confronted my uncle right there. I demanded to know what was going on, reminding him that I had told him not to start any work. He initially denied doing anything, but when I showed him photos, he claimed it was his house and he could do what he wanted. I had to remind him that he was only renting it from me. Things just got worse from there. During a family holiday, my uncle and his girlfriend cornered me. They enthusiastically told me they had a great proposal for me. They laid out this ridiculous 5-year contract with barely any rent, no restrictions on construction, and permission to sublet. I immediately rejected it, telling them I would have my lawyer draft the contract. Fast forward a few months, and they sent me that same contract again, expecting me to sign it. When I refused, Grandma called me up. She angrily accused me of not signing the contract and claimed that if it weren't for her, I wouldn't have inherited anything from my grandpa. That's when I lost it. I told her I couldn't believe what she said, using strong words. She scolded me for my language, saying my grandpa would be disappointed. I told her not to use my grandpa against me and ended the call. After that, both Grandma and Uncle cut me off. Fine by me. I had my lawyer draft a new contract, 3 years, no subletting, and they need my approval for any construction. Everything else stayed the same as Grandpa's original contract. Now my uncle's claiming he can only qualify for $350K instead of the $377K he owes. The rest of the family is on my case, saying I'm forcing him out, that I should accept the lower offer. But you know what? I'm done playing nice. I called up my uncle. I told him that I had been more than fair and listed out his violations of the original contract, unauthorized construction, and attempts to manipulate me. I gave him 2 choices. Either stick to the original agreement of $377,000 to buy the house or move out when the contract ends in November. When he protested, saying it wasn't fair, I pointed out how unfair his treatment of me and disrespect for Grandpa's property had been. I gave him until the end of the week to decide, warning him that after that, I would put the house on the market. I hung up, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. It's time they learned that being family doesn't give you the right to take advantage of someone. This house is my inheritance, my responsibility, and I'm going to handle it my way, the right way. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.